Hello, it's Alexia here. Now, I'd like to introduce the next conversation I'm going to have with Jenny, which is all about reducing the conflict and backlash in the workplace, but not just the workplace, but the birth workplace. This is a highly emotive environment where there's lots going on. People have been working long hours. There's a lot to protect in terms of the sacred moment that is birth, but also because it's fraught with the potential for complications and things going wrong. And there's a lot hinging on these birth experiences. And so that means that there are times when people may be disrespectful, say the things that maybe wind other people up. Maybe some people feel bullied or disrespected or affected negatively in that environment. And that does not serve anyone, least of all the families that we are trying to support in those moments, because the birth space is all about that sacred moment that is birth. And how can we protect that moment as best we can? You know, this is a pivotal moment in a woman's life. For first-time mothers, it's that moment where she meets her firstborn and becomes mother. This is an incredibly important moment, and all care should really centre around the baby and the woman and the family. Unfortunately, it doesn't always work out that way. And so we are left with people referring to many birth systems as toxic, and there are people that struggle with anxiety and really difficult working conditions in terms of long hours and feeling underpaid and all of that. And so all of this can really not help the birth environment, and means that it could be fraught with tension. And that means it can also be fraught with conflict. And so this conversation I am having with Jenny here today is really to help us navigate that and get through that so that we can reduce the conflict and the backlash within the birth space. And so I want you to listen to this conversation with an open heart. I mean, this is a conversation really for the birth professionals, the doulas, the midwives, the childbirth educators, the lactation consultants, people of that nature that work along in supporting families on this journey. But I think it's also a really important conversation for families to listen to. If you're pregnant and you think this isn't for you, it absolutely is for you to listen to as well. But also, I think there are going to be some very uncomfortable things said during this conversation. Some people might feel triggered and annoyed by what Jenny is saying. And I want you to take a pause before you react to what is being said and really think about whether or not it's right for you to be triggered. Is this trigger an opportunity for you to think, hang on a minute, maybe there's some healing for me to do here. Maybe I'm not being entirely honest with myself about how I perform and how I behave in the birth space. And so don't jump onto the keyboard and lash out. Well, you can if you want, that's fine, but that is not going to solve anything, is it? What we're trying to do here is to reduce the conflict and reduce the tension and to bring about a shift in birth culture. And so this means we need to take a hard look at ourselves and how we behave and what triggers us to behave in these ways. So it is with that lens that I want you to look and to listen to this conversation that we're having, because this is the intention that we have for this conversation, to bring about a change, a positive change in birth culture. Okay, I'm handing over the time that I spoke to Jenny Koslow, how we can reduce conflict in the birth space. Hello, Jenny. Welcome to this conversation that we're going to have all about reducing conflict and backlash in the birth space. So I can't wait for this. So just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do, so that people have got a little bit of context for this conversation.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me, because I'm really excited to talk about this. I'm a perinatal educator with about 40 years of experience, but I also travel a lot. So I am a person who loves to listen to people's stories. And I realized that I had accumulated hundreds and hundreds of stories between birth workers. I mean, also with mothers, but mainly with OBGYNs and with doulas and with midwives and with obstetrical nurses and with breastfeeding, lactation consultants. I'm thinking in Spanish because I usually work in Spanish, so you can see my mind making the translation. So anyway, I was just getting all of these stories in countries all over the world, and I thought, this is so helpful because if people could just hear what others are saying about them or thinking about them, there would be so much better understanding, and we could work more collaboratively. Because what I find is most of the stories are about they don't respect us and we feel invisible and they have to stop doing this. And it was so much about them that I was thinking, where did the gestational family go? Where's the couple? Where's the new mother? And all of that. So I started to offer to do lectures basically on what I was experiencing as a listener, so that we could maybe have a better understanding of where the obstacles are and are being able to move forward for the betterment of maternity healthcare workers, but also, and most importantly, for the new family. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. A little bit of what those stories are what they're saying.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because a lot of people, they can be so focused on self in that environment because it can be so highly pressured or highly people are tired, they maybe don't have their full resources available to them because they're exhausted, they're probably suffering from anxiety and the pressures of maybe working long hours, and so they're not their best self in those environments, but also maybe they've just got a lot of unresolved stuff of their own and they're getting triggered a lot, and so all of this is showing up in some of the ways that you described. Is that how you see maybe some of this, the reason behind some of this, or is it, what were your thoughts?
I do a lot of social experimentation. So I do informal surveys on the street. I have get-togethers with people I don't know to see how open they are to meeting people for the first time. I'm fascinated by the human condition in social settings, and I love group process. But I think it's a little bit of feeling that they could talk to me. It was a safe place because I was passing through. I wasn't gossiping. I wasn't gathering the information to use it against them. I was genuinely curious and open to wanting to hear their story and really feeling that it could end up helping others. And so people, I found, were very, very forthcoming with their very, very personal feelings about the frustrations they had as a birth worker. And I go to a lot of events. I just went to the Midwifery Today conference in Germany. I go to all sorts of events in the whole spectrum of the birth world to really kind of be a listener on the sideline and say, wow, I don't even think they're aware how they're coming off as being very either open to change or resistant to change, or where the focus was. And I think I'm very perceptive. I have kind of an intuitive way of really kind of hitting the mark with what people were actually trying to say, what was underneath the words. And I think it's a lovely thing when we can be a little bit more humble and say, yes, we really do need to improve, and we are doing good things, each of us, but so much of the criticism I found given from one group to another was exactly what they themselves were doing, and maybe even worse.
So some of these groups, are we talking maybe midwives versus lactation consultants versus doulas, these kind of different professions that maybe interact and come together along the journey of that new family, or the family that's about to, bring a little new human into the world? Is it, and the intersection as to where all these professionals maybe have contact with each other? Is that what you mean?
Exactly. So it's the circle of care, which was a very basic International Childbirth Education Association concept way back in the the 70s, and it's really a wonderful idea how we each basically putting the pregnant woman and her partner and the baby to be in the center, all the professionals who were all just as important and were contributing something that was absolutely necessary. But then we need to talk about how are they all getting along with each other, and they're really not getting along very well. So again, that's my perspective, standing back and looking at all that. And the way I explain it when I give workshops and the rest, I'm just going to use a piece of paper. I'm very analog. I use very little technology, just to kind of explain that when we look at the birth world today, I'm going to actually divide it. And I'm going to say that basically there's what I call a biomedical side, and there's a more naturalistic side. And we can change those words. The words don't matter. But basically, we have these two sides. And what we're going to find is we're going to find extremes. So if I were to ask you, what would be the most extremely natural birth that comes to mind, what would you say?
Lotus birth, probably, or a free birth.
Right. And we're actually getting to like in the open air. We're having free birthing is over on this side, lotus birth exactly. We're getting to that kind of a birth experience. And when we go over to the more medical side and we go to the extremely medicalized birth, what would come to mind?
C-section.
We can go way, way more than that.
Okay.
It becomes so normalized that it's not considered an extreme anymore. So we're getting into surrogacy, we're getting into artificial wombs, we're getting into fertility treatments that are, we're really going way beyond the, if we were to divide this into thinking that anatomy is basically, it's a machine that's working, there's more of the idea of a mechanical way of giving birth this way, a more natural humanistic side on this side. And when we look at this, it's broken up. Basically, we have birth in private clinics. We have birth in public hospitals. We go over to the other side and we have birthing centers, birthing homes. And then we have home birth. And each one of these has professionals that basically represent each of these places to have births. So we're basically talking about OBGYNs, their surgeons, etc. And the type of birth we're mainly going to see in this setting are C-sections, cesareans. Okay. Then we move over to public hospitals. We do have anesthesia in some of them, not all of them. And we're basically, depending on where you are in the world, but you're having obstetrical nurses, for example, in all of Latin America, there are obstetrical nurses who are basically the ones delivering those babies. You have midwives in other parts of the world, etc., basically doing it. And the OBGYN comes in when there's a complication. But the most of births will be handled by these midwives or obstetrical nurses. And they will be vaginal births, some will be with epidural, and there will be some cesarean sections. Okay, so there's from a minimal to a maximum amount of medical intervention happening on this side. When we go over to birthing centers, birthing homes, we're going to usually find midwives who are the ones running them. And we're talking about vaginal birth with basically very, very little medical intervention. Okay, and home births, these are independent midwives, autonomous midwives, and then we're even getting into here, we're getting into traditional midwives, okay, that are more in rural areas and have a tradition, we're talking about Mexico and many places where they have this wonderful tradition. So each one of these has kind of like a value system, a set of protocols in their minds, a manual, it's not real, but on how you act when you represent this group. So like if you're over here, if I observe, I will go to many lectures or courses or training classes, and I just observe. I'm not so interested in what they're saying. I'm interested in how they're saying, because that's my specialty. It's in teaching methodologies. And they will dress a certain way on this side, different than here. They will wear different perfume if they wear perfume at all. They'll use incense. They'll have certain kinds of shoes. They'll believe in, I mean, the whole thing is set up that there's a certain way you act when you are part of this system. Unfortunately, this side thinks that this is the system. But this is also a system. It's the non-system. It's that we don't like the system. Okay, so this is also a system. And basically, this system, for all its faults, is busy doing their day-to-day job, and they're just minding their business in great part. This side spends lots of time and energy discrediting the system. I mean, it's almost like a full-time job. They need to basically say what's wrong with this side in order to justify why they are necessary. And we have new professionals, on the field. We have people who feel very disempowered. We have midwives in hospitals that feel that the values of midwifery have been taken from them. They're very frustrated. There's some things that everyone has in common, basically that the OBGYNs are a big problem with humanized birth and respected birth, but we're also overlooking that every day I'm noticing changes, and they are happening. I can tell you that there are OBGYNs who have crossed the aisle and learned how to be doulas. And these are OBGYNs. We see more people on this side wanting to get more of the psycho-emotional support, the humanistic values, than we see people on this side doing the hard work of getting better skills in physiology. And for example, the doula movement, which has been an amazing movement. I mean, talk about successful. I think one of the problems that it's created a lot of wonderful things for people, but it happened very quickly and very successfully. And all of a sudden, we had doula training courses for the last 20 years that basically have become a huge business. But since it works in the realm of service, and I like to say, I'm also doula, just to mention that they're, that it translates in the Greek meaning servant. But then we have this whole thing about business and how to be compensated, and of course all those things. So it is a big business. Okay, that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with that, but then we can't get credit for being altruistic, which is what I heard in the interview the other day. It's like, it isn't altruism. It's not philanthropy. It's a business. Okay. And since it has to do with empathy and kindness and supporting each other and all those lovely, wonderful things, there is a big conflict with how to present themselves. So you just have to be kind of like honest about it. So because there's so many doula training programs all over the world, some of them are like, come to Costa Rica for a weekend and, we'll do some yoga and you get to go home with a certificate that says you've been trained as a doula. We have what I've seen, and I was formally trained as a perinatal educator in the United States almost 40 years ago. All the prenatal education training courses started to see that people didn't want to do that anymore. They really wanted to be doulas. That doulas was the big thing. So they all kind of downsized their prenatal education part, and they became doula trainers as well. And it became a very big business because that's where all the money was. I hate to say that, but what do you want me to say? I mean, it became this big business. We now have a surplus of doulas in the world that are trained, but have very, very little experience, have only seen 2 births. One was their own and one was their best friend's, and so we have doulas basically preparing their couples, but they don't necessarily have the experience and especially the basics and physiology to do it properly. So what do we see? We see people who sit down and with all this passion and things, without the subtleties, but these blocks of generalizations, tell couples this is what will happen in labor. And there's a responsibility that comes from preparing couples for childbirth. I mean, you have to kind of be able to say, this is what I know and this is what I don't know. And so I'm not going to talk about physiology because it's not my field. I'm going to invite an OBGYN, an obstetrical nurse, or a midwife to come and give that part of it. You know, it's like that kind of being able to delineate where we can contribute and where we shouldn't because it's not ethical. I don't see that happening in the birth world. So I see a lot of blurred lines.
When it comes to childbirth education, where does that sit? Because in the UK, which is where I went through my pregnancies, it's up to the parent to go and seek that out. So, and then you had to spend money on that. And some people don't. They just don't have the budget and they choose not to do that because they can't afford it for whatever reason. So there's a gap. It's not like, I don't know, I get a sense maybe that you're saying that doulas have come in and now there's no childbirth educators, but actually there isn't, I don't think there's a system or a way of educating not just women, but everybody as to birth. I mean, that should really be happening at school as far as I'm concerned.
Totally.
Because it's the whole, it's so broken, right?
Well, so, we act like we have this secret knowledge, you know, and it's almost like played up, like we're going to give you this, but it's basic knowledge that just isn't being taught, that should be taught from the very, I mean, I've given sex education classes to 11-year-olds, and their questions are fantastic, but neither they nor their mothers, neither their grandmothers would understand the answer because they don't have a context, because they don't have an understanding of even how their body works. But the UK is an example where prenatal education, antenatal classes are taken seriously. Most hospitals will have them, but in other places of the world, it doesn't exist at all. But there are countries, Costa Rica is one of them, and a lot of Latin countries where Mexico isn't, unfortunately, but where in the public hospitals, part of the service they give is a course, and most people will take that prenatal course. But now with there's a lot of, we have to understand that these things carry there's status involved. So there's status involved with a private clinic scheduled cesarean, but there's also status in a home birth with a midwife. As much as, you know, people don't want to recognize that, these are both status symbols. And the only way of giving birth in this continuum is public health hospital that doesn't cost any money, but the rest do. So that creates a mix in the demographic of who can actually use them. But what we have are people, because of so much information on the internet, basically thinking that they can Google anything they really need. There isn't really, the whole idea of preparing for childbirth has been taken out of the equation of having a respectful, humanized, positive birth experience. Why don't we talk more about preparation? That is a big component in having a good. We have on this side, we have institutionalized childbirth education, which basically just tells you this is the way you're going to have the baby because this is the way we attend births in this hospital. And they want you to be a good patient, so they don't tell you all the other ways to give birth and everything else. Whereas on this side, basically, even though they often say that they're open and objective and don't demonize having a birth in the hospital, they really, you know, if I were to observe them, listen to the choice of words, the body language and whatnot, there definitely is a feeling of having a birth here is better than having a birth here. And what we really have to see is, you know, is that our place to kind of tell people that when maybe some people, the values that they get here, which is reliability, more control, more predictability, hierarchy in case of a complication, safety, those things might be more important to some people than human kindness, accompaniment, more natural birth, you know, and those things, each person has to find out what really is right for them at that moment. And there is a lot of fear-based decision-making coming from this side, and that is true. And decisions based on information that isn't necessarily accurate. But it also happens here where there's confirmation bias, and the information that's given here is really tailored to fit the belief system of the people on this side. So it's also not, there's evidence that isn't always reliable, you know, so we choose what evidence we want to use. It's not really being objective. And I am just asking to have that open conversation. So I think, for example, this side, there's a lot more authority, and some people expecting their first baby, they want to feel that they are in company with someone with authority. It makes them feel more confident. And here, when I try and work with new professionals about standing in their authority, I'll either get total denial, or I'll get people say, yeah, I really have a conflict with being authoritative because I feel that I'm like taking advantage of the person and not giving them that horizontal relationship. But that horizontal relationship, I think, is a fallacy. What horizontal relationship? If it's a horizontal relationship, then I might as well just ask my neighbor to come with me at my birth. The reason these people are professionals is because they have certain skill sets that makes them different than their client, patient, or student. And so the discussion of authority, I think, is a big issue. You know, I find there's a lot of trepidation with new doulas kind of assuming authority or taking too much authority. And there's a lot of authority here because it's true, this system requires it, but people saying that they're no longer satisfied personally with having all the authority, and they want to learn how to share it more with their patients, clients, and students.
Do you think that this imbalance in authority, or it's not necessarily in authority, but it's how the professional feels about their authoritative status, let's say, on the system side that you've outlined, most people within that framework are employed and it's their job. So they have a full-time job and they are a nurse, an OBGYN, they pull a salary. And so they're relying on the authority of their employer. You know, they work for a hospital and they're kind of borrowing that authority, even though internally they might not feel very much in their power. Whereas on the other side of your chart, you've got people that work for themselves, that are self-employed. And the minute you work for yourself, there's a huge piece there around whether I feel I have that authority, that it's very easy to borrow when you're being employed, and you can borrow the brand or the organization in which you work. And as somebody that's gone from kind of being employed to working for myself, I definitely can attest to that sense of, you know, I'm still doing the same stuff, but where I just felt a lot more authoritative when I had the brand and the business around me than when I was doing on my own. And so we have these, because the other side of your chart, the natural side, for want of a better word, is full of maybe independent freelancers, you know, people that work for themselves. And so they've got a bigger job, internal job, I feel, to do in order to feel that same sense of authority and confidence in their work that maybe those that are on the institutionalized side don't have to do. And maybe they might be a little bit overconfident in their authority, maybe act too much, and therefore maybe come across a little bit more, I don't know, not arrogant, but maybe, you know, sort of, yeah, this is how it's going to go down, whether you like it or not, honey, you've done it here, we're doing it this way. And this is where some families do feel they've lost control of that birth experience because they're now being told what to do and they don't feel like they have choice in the same way. What are your thoughts on this idea that
I think that's a really good point. But I think it's more of an internal thing than an external thing. It's more of when the person speaks with the pregnant woman, it's the relationship that person is creating, whether it's 5 minutes in a prenatal consultation, or whether it's, you know, during the birth or in a prenatal class, or in the interview with the doula, or, you know, it's how we communicate and how much of ourselves do we share, as much the personal with the professional. It's that right balance of both. And so this idea, I'm talking, I mean, midwives, autonomous midwives, they're badasses. They got a lot of, you know, I mean, they don't need any help with their authority. I would say it's more the new professionals that are more new on the scene, that have a lot of passion and a lot of desire to serve and be empathetic, but don't have enough experience and basics in physiology to feel confident enough to project authority. And there's nothing, it's almost like it's a dirty word. It's almost like if I'm an empathetic person, then being authoritative is like contrary to that. And it's really not, in my opinion. So on the other side, you have people who feel that their authority has been supplanted, that it's dictated to them, that there's all these regulations and protocols, and it's very difficult to work in that setting. These are individuals who need to connect with their patient in a way that they're respected, but they're also where a relationship is formed based on a heart-to-heart connection. This is what they know they need. This is why they chose this field to go into it. And they have to somehow work with a system that doesn't always allow that to happen. And it's not because they don't want it to happen. It's that it's quite difficult to do. And I think they deserve a lot more respect and recognition for how difficult it is to work in that system with the values that they have. And what they don't get is respect from the other side, frankly. It's almost like there's this kind of insinuation that until they break out on their own and become an independent midwife with home birth, and will they actually be truly able to be the midwives that they should be. But most babies are born in hospitals. I mean, that's where the work has to be done. Granted, we have more home births and it's wonderful, and water birth and doulas, all these things are fantastic. But we can't just dump the other side and say that only this side is the valid side. I feel that most women, if they were given the chance and could financially afford it, would want to go to a birthing center. And if you look around the world, this is the most discriminated way of having a baby. They make it very difficult to open birth centers. The governments, the Ministry of Health, I mean, they make it quite difficult. So when there's a successful birth home that opens anywhere around the world, we want to applaud that, because that's not the extreme. It's getting more around the middle. And I feel that the changes that are really going to happen are going to be in this space, where we use a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but it's not one or the other. And when we go way into the extremes, that should be a choice for some people, but most people will not want to have that kind of an experience. And here we have a lot of activism. Here we might have a little bit more advocacy. There's a lot of really angry people that want to almost prepare their client to go out like a good soldier and battle the system and make it better. And I don't feel that that's their place, frankly. We have efforts in all the categories trying to make changes, even though this is seen as they aren't, but they really are. It's changing in the right direction around the world. I personally like hospitals that employ doulas as part of their staff. For me, that is a win-win. That's taking the qualities of both sides and offering something that really will help the couples. But then you'll have doulas saying, well, they're not real doulas because they're working for a hospital. And, real doulas can't work for a hospital because then they become part of the system. And I don't think that's fair again. I don't want to sound like I'm just bashing the doula movement, because there are amazing individuals out there doing incredible things that are just absolutely, they go unrecognized, and these people do it for all the right reasons. But as groups, I find a lot of resistance to recognizing where they could improve.
So what's happening in the hospital side that's improving then? Because there is a lot of fear within that system. It's a very toxic system, typically. The UK is incredibly toxic, with midwives that are just, morale is on the floor. They're overworked, underpaid. And I don't, I can't speak in terms of other countries, then in France, they're not really allowed home births. I mean, for a woman to have a home birth, she's got to jump through so many hoops and pay so much money to be able to do that. Yeah. So there's a lot of, the hospital environment does seem to be the place where a lot of births are geared towards, but also there is inherently a lot of fear within that system. One, because the system itself is incredibly toxic. There are lots of people that are worried about losing their jobs, that have got lots of unresolved trauma, that are projecting fears of their own. I mean, it feels like it's a melting pot that creates, that doesn't kind of, that doesn't seem to be dissipating that fear and moving. So I'd love to hear, when you're saying it's changing and it's changing for the better, what are some of the things that are happening? Because that's not what I'm hearing in many conversations.
I think the more we keep saying it's toxic, I mean, there are a lot of people working every day doing great things in that system that is just, you can't just say it's all toxic. It's not. They don't have the support of all of you because you're in this toxic system. Then it's not true. Why do we keep saying that? There are many hospitals that are outdated and are stuck, but it's the individual in these hospitals. It's not an entity. It's the individuals that work there every day, and you don't know what personal thing each one is doing with a certain patient to make that patient feel better. How many times a day, going home every night and going back the next day and doing it, and knowing that all you people are just saying it's a bunch of crap what they're doing, it's this toxic system, there's no, it's like, that's not helping. How are you helping these people? I'm not meaning you, but they're not being recognized, they're not being for what they do, and it's just like thrown into this huge category. For example, I'll just take an example in Argentina. In Argentina, we have a hospital in Bahia Blanca. It's not even in Buenos Aires. They all went and did a water birth course with Barbara Harper, and they just, and they got some money from I don't know where, this hospital, and they decided to invest in a whole big natural birth wing of the maternity hospital. But they realized that they didn't really have, they couldn't really train the staff because they hadn't been doing non-interventive birth. And so they asked a local prenatal educator and doula, who had been very professional, has a basis in education, if she would create a training program for the staff, which she did, which ended up being amazing. The whole staff was so enthusiastic. They started to have these non-intervention births, with water birth or not, and the response started to be amazing. And the two other hospitals in the city said, well, we want to do it too. And I mean, those things are happening.
Yeah, no, that sounds incredible.
It's amazing. And they crossed the aisle into a non-medical person and asked that person to train them. I mean, that is amazing. And that there are examples of that, and I could give you lots of them. We have in Hyderabad, India, in the Fernandez Hospital, for example, they have a great prenatal education program, and they talk to the couples about choices. And the couple chooses, do I want a gynecologist to attend my birth? Do I want a midwife to train my birth? Do I want a doula present? They make these choices and they give them the options. It's not like you either get this or this. It's no. These are the advantages of having an OBGYN. These are the advantages of having a midwife. These are the advantages of having or not a doula. And they just make the choice. But there's not this kind of like, we only represent one type of birthing. No, they're opening up to including other ways. And there are changes like that. I mean, we have cases of, we have like Doctora Susana Bueno in Colombia. She started to get involved with the indigenous community. So when they start looking at what's happening in the indigenous populations, there's examples of this. I have a bunch of them, where the traditional hospitals started to open their minds to including other ways of birthing, thanks to the influence of studying their own local indigenous populations. They painted the birth rooms so they would be more the colors and the way that the indigenous population would want to have. I mean, there are these openings of trying to work collaboratively and broaden their services, being more humanistic for the sake of everybody. But we've got to stop bashing them all and putting them in a category like they're all toxic. They're not.
But it sounds like some of those initiatives are coming from the top. They're coming down, and so where there isn't that maybe leadership that is going for change, then you have the people that are on the coalface, the front line of healthcare, which is like the midwives, those that are giving care directly to those that are needing the care, doing the very best they can in that front line position, but not getting the support from managers, and maybe is that where this conflict is coming, where you've got these people that are doing amazing work and doing what they can to not feel like the system's making them do it a certain way, and they're creating these pockets of magic and wonder, but they're not being supported within that environment themselves.
No, but there's resources they can get. So there's many midwives who are trained with, for example, Nuria Vives, which is I don't know how to translate this. It's like birth with movement, sensory awareness. Many, almost, I mean, I can't tell you how many midwives in Spain have received her courses. There's the Lakshmi method, many midwives. There's Esther Navarro, who did hypnobirth style training. Many midwives from all of the hospitals in the country have received training. I mean, they're getting outside training, and it's improving greatly what they're doing. And so they're branching out beyond, the hospitals are looking for continued education from different sources.
And are we seeing a change in birth outcomes in Spain? Like this pace of change, or this change that's going on in Spain? Are we seeing anything happening in terms of, let's say, the C-section rate changing, or the rates of not satisfaction of birth experiences among women? I don't know if they track that, but to see, well, what's all that bringing about in terms of the experience of the family? Do we know what impact that's having?
Well, I mean, it's the C-section rate is extraordinarily high in private clinics. Basically, wherever there's a dollar to be made, whether it's in India or it's in Chile or it's in Mexico, it's almost 90 to 100% cesarean section rate. That's an abomination. That is something that is absolutely unacceptable, and why there hasn't been more outrage since 30 years ago when it started to happen, I don't understand. This is a huge topic that is just, that's definitely not a lot we can do with the private clinics. They're becoming more and more, they appear to be, well, we offer water birth and birth plans, and it's all just fake commercialization in order to look like they're open to natural birth, but they are not. Okay, so I am saying, I'm not going to even talk about this, but this is a big problem. There's no question. And that's basically where OBGYNs are. And that's where almost everybody else agrees that is a huge problem. So I'm focusing, when we talk about this, the toxicity, this I agree with you, and that we'll have to do in another conversation. But I'm trying to get more open-mindedness about public hospitals, because that's where most people are giving birth in the world. And we can't just dump it saying, it's just stuck in this horrible system. No, it's really, we have to look at what it entails to work in these systems and how people on their own are trying to make a difference. And they just need a little bit of support from this side, and stop bashing them so much. Help them. Ask them to come give part of your class. Listen to them. Respect them. Because what we have is so much resentment between public hospital midwives and obstetrical nurses and doulas, for example. It is big, the resentment. Very, very big.
And do you notice that in any countries in particular, or is that, we were talking, where's that strong in your view?
Spain, the Catalanes, it's very, very, very strong. I see it I don't ever talk about the States and Canada. I don't know that much about the UK, Australia, westernized countries. I don't know that much.
Mm.
But I know that maybe in countries like all of Latin America, where it's more conventional, it's hard to make changes because it's really not at the forefront of the, I don't know how to say it in English, the new breakthrough pioneering things. They're trying to do that, but it's harder for them to do it because the system, that the culture is so established in a certain way. There the relationship is not good. It's really not. There's a lot of resentment, and it's because of what we've been talking about, this kind of the way we talk about them, the way we put them in a category that's basically there's no hope for them. They're just do all this shit work, and they're all frustrated and burned out, and that's true. But so let's help them, not just keep saying, God, that's the shit. When are you going to get out of that place? No, I mean, let's kind of see where they are doing things well. But also, I think doulas especially and doula training programs need to be more professional. I think because they part of the reason that so much resentment occurs is because doulas don't pay taxes. They're not regulated. They don't have protocols. They don't have to spend time filling out, this files and things in order to be at the end of the day. They don't have anywhere near the responsibility that an obstetrical nurse, a doctor, or a midwife has. Okay, we don't talk about that. They get all the credit. They make so much more money than these midwives make. They make so much more money than these midwives make. I'm saying that again.
Well, no, some might, but a lot don't.
No, but per hour for the work they get, a few €1,000 is what these women make in a month. Okay, so I'm just saying why there's resentment. And they don't have the responsibility of, this very serious, there's a life and death part of giving birth that the doulas don't have to be responsible for. Okay, and that comes with there's a weightiness of having that responsibility.
I'm not sure whether doulas might agree with you on many of those points, and I wouldn't want to speak for them. But there are doulas that maybe only charge $1,000 for the birth, and they might be there for 24 hours. So they're not just there for a few hours. So there's a lot of things you just shared there that I wouldn't want to step in and speak for a doula. They do carry the weight of those, even though they might not have maybe the responsibility that maybe the legal responsibility, whatever it is, they certainly carry a lot of that weight. Emotional weight.
No, they carry the emotional weight, but they also act like they invented empathy. Like they're the only ones who they have to be there in order to ensure that there's kindness and empathy and support. They're not the only ones that do that. I'm also a doula. I've attended, over 100 births. I know exactly what it is to be a doula. I know what it is to have 3 or 4 days I know exactly what it is. And I know that I'm just saying that the part of the perception, again, I'm just telling you why there's resentment, is because when most midwives that work, I'll just take a country like Uruguay, they work 6 days a week, they work 12 hours a day, they make about €1,000 a month. That's their paycheck. Okay, so if I get €600 for a birth, and I know now many are making way more than that, and they're not paying taxes on it, and they don't have to, it's like, and the responsibility, the emotional responsibility everybody has, but the physiological part of the medical aspect of any birth, which comes with years and years and years of training, that is a huge responsibility that doulas do not have. Okay, of course they have responsibility, but you can't compare the safety, the medical, the well-being, the physiological well-being of the baby who has a complication, and who's going to make that be okay. It's not the doula. She doesn't know anything about that. That's not her role. It's someone who has a huge responsibility in order to try and resolve that kind of a complication. I mean, you just can't compare them. And if you do, then that's what's going to create this backlash.
No,
because
but we're not trying to compare, because the doula's not there for the physiological, for the complication situation. They are there to support the
right.
family on an emotional level, and to be the, so they're not trying to be that. But without wanting to get into the throes of doula bashing, which I don't want this to be, because they, what is it that we can do, or that they can do, because to get around this? Because I also feel that, even though you've mentioned doulas a lot, there's also, let's say, lactation consultants, or breastfeeding consultants that come in and that are also supporting, that maybe aren't giving, maybe they're also not communicating in a way that is helpful, that is
Right.
that maybe they're easy to shame mothers around those situations. There's a lot of that judgment and shame and guilt that is coming from all sides.
Yes.
And midwives are very good at dishing that out as well. Everybody is, because
Yes.
they're all humans.
Absolutely.
And they've all
I
got
agree.
unresolved stuff. That means that they're just, and they're tired. This will go back to what I started with, is when you're tired and you've just you're on a 12-hour shift, and it's your fourth that week in a row, and you've got severe anxiety that you're trying to keep under a lid in the corner, then all your unconscious biases, all your triggers, all your shit's going to come out, and you're going to be super judgmental, super triggering, you're going to be all those things, and it's not going to be your best version of yourself. But you can't even try to do that, because you're barely functioning. You haven't even had lunch that day. So there's a lot of people functioning in that kind of environment that makes it really hard to be on your best, and to deliver in the way that deep down you truly like to do. But some people also, so I'm just trying to, how can we help people to better serve in that environment, so that they can be more mindful and conscious of the different players, and keep in mind the family that they're serving?
Well, I mean, that is the most important question of this whole conversation. And that's the work I do in my workshops. I try and get us to a place where we can actually let down our guard and recognize what we have in common with the other and the intention of the other, and not make it about us versus them in a black and white world, and trying to understand how maybe we're creating more division than unity. And it starts with an openness of recognizing that we have work to do. And so this kind of arrogance, self-righteousness, almost bullying. I get a lot of bullying. If I write anything on social media, I'm going to get bullied, just because there's a way to say things, and if you don't say it the way they like, that is not conducive to any change. Okay. So if these training programs actually include a lot about professional ethics, about communication for a united front, opening ourselves and letting down our guard, and trying to be able to feel a little bit of empathy, not only for our client, but for other birth workers, applying that same, being congruent with what our values are, but not just for a select few, actually applying it in the way we conduct ourselves, with the choices we make, with the words we use, with the way we interact with each other. I would like to see more respect for the elders, the ones who have come before. I'm sorry to keep going back to doulas, but they are the main new thing in the last 20 years that has totally thrown something in the mix of the whole birth world. I mean, this has been a phenomenal contribution, but they're not the doulas that Penny Simkin talked about 30 years ago. They didn't make decisions, this and this and this. I mean, now they're much more, they some of them, do much more than a company. They prepare, they're activists, they believe very strongly about things, and they want to make a difference. I mean, it comes from the right places, but I think if we could just talk about, for example, I work a lot with what I call perinatal communication and pedagogy. It's how do we communicate? to ourselves, to our clients, to our patients, to our students, but to each other, to our colleagues. You know, how do we make these references? Why do we use words that automatically will open or close doors? Why don't we find words that are more from the middle and make people feel that they can come towards you instead of feeling that you are not open to hearing them on either side?
Mm.
And you know, I give lectures to doctors in public hospitals, and you know, because I have a lot of prejudice against them. And until I see them personally in front of me and hear their stories and their family, and that they didn't sleep, and that they have a colleague that they don't agree with the way he conducts himself, but you know, just hear it. It's like it totally makes them human, and I can put a face to it. And it is so important that I make sure that I am fair in anything that I'm reporting, because I've really listened to each of them, and I hear they're all really wanting the same thing. It's not like the good guys and the bad guys. It's like, so I really think that if we can make it personal and really see the human being in front of us with their story, we can see their humanity, and we can see that they're also frustrated with things that they don't know how to change. But it's got to come with humility, and saying that that I myself also am at fault, and I myself sometimes make that same mistake, and I myself would do good by recognizing it and trying to make a difference by changing myself instead of just everyone else. So, I mean, some people are open to these workshops, and a lot of people feel very threatened by them. But I think they make a huge difference. You know, everybody, it's amazing. You've got professionals crying, you know, just, it's like opening up this thing of, there's all this, you have to remember why people chose to even be in this whole big birth field, whether it's very biomedical or not. I mean, it comes from a really, really beautiful place, and they want that to be seen, and they know that sometimes it isn't. And
so is the answer that is this something that I feel like this needs to come from the top, like that this needs to be incorporated, like hospitals need to be more open and bring in, you know, like support the midwives, bring in some of these people from the other side, let's say, but also the doula training organizations need to bring in, you know, make sure it's very clear that there is communication, that there's, you know, not inclusive, I don't use that word, but that sense of respect and moral ethics about that informs their work. And I'm sure a lot of those true doula training organizations say, well, yeah, sure, we do that, but maybe they don't all do it in the best way they could, question mark, I don't know. But at the moment it feels like maybe the responsibility for that sits on the individual to just go and find another training program to kind of kit them up with another avenue of expertise, so that they're better suited to that. And then that can feel quite overwhelming for somebody that's maybe working for themselves, that's got to do their marketing and all the rest of it to try and, you know, keep food on the table. So where do you see how do we move forward with this? Like, where does this sit? Is it just some people who've just got to find the workshops on their own, or should it, are we talking to the decision makers here in the birth industry to say, hey guys, come on, let's sort this out. We've got to take this seriously.
It's all good. Yes, 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 and yes for everything you just said. But ultimately, it's the birthing family that has to ask for these changes. We can't just do it for them. They're the ones who have to, from the grassroots, they're the ones who have to say, this is unacceptable, and we're not going to, you know, why are we doing all this energy? All we can do is create a couple who is open to searching for their own answers based on something that feels right for them, and supporting them, and that they have a voice that, if they feel like using it, could make a difference in the world. But whether they use it or not, I mean, that's for them to do, right?
And this is where I think this kind of idea falls down, because not enough families take birth seriously enough. You get a lot of women and they just work right up to the 2 weeks before their due date, 1 week before their due date. They've got no birth prep. They don't They're more interested in buying the right pram and the
Yeah.
car seat than investing in preparing up here and here for their birth. And this is why we have the work that I do, which is with women that have had those terrible first births because that's what they did. And now they definitely don't want to have that happen again. And now they're taking it seriously second time round. And now they've got birth trauma under their belt. And the reason they've got birth trauma is because they ended up going along with the system that didn't treat them well, that bullied them, you know. So there's this kind of where,
Well,
you know, how do we fix this?
I mean, I love this because, you know, my baby is prenatal education. Like I said before, why aren't we giving more importance to the preparation period? It can make a huge difference.
Huge, yeah.
Huge difference. And we're just making it seem like it's not that big of a deal when it is so important. And it's that disconnect, you know. So part of, well, at least the method I use, and I train people in this, is, you know, this kind of like how to awaken the couple from this disconnect. But it's not by standing there on a box and telling them what they need to do. It's very subtle, very subtle. And then the empowerment, you know, sometimes the birth will be what empowers them. But let's not wait for that to happen, because it might go the other way. And so we need to work on the empowering in the preparation period, where they're given practical tools to actually find their voice and practice using it. You can't expect a person to speak up for themselves when they've never done it with authority figures their entire life. And so that's what we're doing. We're actually getting them to connect with that part of themselves for the right reasons, not out of pressure. And little by little, oftentimes we'll need more than that first birth. We'll get the payback will be the second or third birth, you know, but it's never going to totally leave them. The birth is just one part of it. They're going to have difficulties with raising that child, especially with authority issues and speaking up and negotiating and boundaries. All these things are going to be issues that we see as prenatal educators, that we want to help them recognize and support them, and that they can find the resources to work on it. But we can't make them do anything, because imposition is absolutely unacceptable. You know, that's when you abuse your authority. And some are ready and some aren't, but we can surround them with practical tools. This is a huge thing. I mean, I feel this side often will idealize birth, and this will make it so frightening, because they'll talk about all the complications and why it's necessary that you have to have an IV and you have to do this in case of this and that. I mean, but this is also way over to the side of unicorns and rainbows and orgasms and ancestral connection with a birth goddess and this and that. And I mean, some people, basically, they just want a healthy baby and a positive birth experience. They don't need all the extra accessories that is promised on that other side. I mean, again, finding that balance. But I mean, if we can take anything from this, it's like, I think the preparation period is critical, that couples learn to find their voice, how to express it, what really matters to them. Values clarification, values can be taught. A lot of these things are this is the moment, because you have that couple with that vulnerability, that openness, that porous emotionality, that makes it so amazing what they experience during that period. And, you know, this whole conversation, we haven't even mentioned the baby, you know. And again, it's like there's gotta be that connection with the baby, that sometimes we don't even, you know, how can we talk about birth and not talk about the baby, you know, about that connection with the baby. And a lot of couples feel it's too abstract for them. The whole idea is abstract. I mean, they're basically, when you can like make them fill with wonder and understand what the miraculous of what's happening and what's going on inside their bodies, and how the child is communicating with them. And I mean, you can just like, wow, it can be amazing. Childbirth education can be just like amazing. So hopefully people will take the career of the profession of childbirth education more seriously. They'll get the training they need to do it better. They won't do it without the training, but they'll say, I think I need the training so I can do it more effectively. I want more skills, and go for it and get those things. And because, you know, you can't have another chance at it. This is one time. The birth is coming. And if it's not you didn't use your time really well, you know, that's a shame. It was a missed opportunity. So, you know, yeah, I would love people to get more interested in childbirth education as key to.
But I think that the education bit is one piece, because the other piece is you can't just tell someone this is how you speak up for yourself, because if they don't have that the inner work done to enable them to do that, they're never going to be able to speak up for themselves. So you can learn the tools or have some practical strategies, but you have to confront those inner conflicts.
It's experiential. It's all experiential. We get rid of the theoretical. We don't use PowerPoint presentations. This is hands-on. These are very simple methods. I would be happy to give a free class on some of the strategies we use to make this interiorize into themselves so that they understand what it feels like to use your voice, and then go from there. I'd be happy to do that if anybody's interested.
Well, we'll wrap it up there, Jenny, because I feel like we could carry on for a long time, and we're slightly over. So I just want to thank you for this brilliant conversation, and I think there's going to be a lot here for doulas to think about, midwives to think about, families to think about.
Please don't be mad at me, any of them. Everyone in the birth movement is amazing. Each one does it for the right reason. It's just like, let's just recognize where we're being misunderstood, and let's try and correct it with humility and get the training we need when we don't have it. That's all.
Thank you, Jenny. And if anybody wants to track you down to do your training or to bring you in some capacity, where can they find you?
They can find me through you, or just write to me at my email, which is, I'm trying to pronounce it in English, Previda, PREVIDA @gmail.com.
Okay, thanks, Jenny. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.